power on.
Accessing historical database. Year 2020. The tech giants become aware of the greatest threat to their corporatist domination. An obscure science and tech podcast becomes a major factor in a peaceful open source revolt against the military Silicon Valley industrial complex. The podcast, Sovryn Tech. Its host, Dr. Brian Sovryn. The tech giants tried to stop Sovryn Tech. They can't.
Here to help you with your case of the Mondays. Woo! The Golden Stallion, the man of tomorrow, Savzu, the rated R radio star, is ready to bring it on. And I said Monday. Why did I say Monday? Is this coming out a day late? Yes, technically, but now no longer technically. How about that? Does that make sense? We'll run with it. Keep going. So, Sovryn Tech releases for main episodes have moved to Mondays. This show, over the years, we've tried out different days, and, every once in a while, you evolve a bit. You go forward. Just like the new intro that you just heard. I hope you enjoyed that. All hot and ready for 2020. You're getting it a little bit early. Just very exciting stuff, and we have all kinds of things planned for this show throughout the year of 2020. But one of the deals is we are moving to Monday releases. Originally, Sovryn Tech actually, and this is almost 10 years ago now, amazing. But originally, we came out on Fridays, then we moved to Saturdays, then we moved to Sundays, and now we're on Mondays. But regardless, you're getting the same amount of Sovryn Tech that you always want. And, really, believe me, I know the occasions where it hasn't come out on time. I mean, the clamoring that I hear, the emails that I get, the tweets, they don't stop. But don't worry, baby. So I updated, actually, speaking of Twitter, I did update this fact on Twitter to let you know there. Of course, that's the place to go to get all of the latest news and latest things going on with Sovryn Tech. But we are moving to Monday releases. Very excited about that. And of course, happy Saturnalia, everyone, or perhaps happy Calendar, if you're more of that persuasion for either of those holidays. Go back and listen to some episodes from, shall we say, the last week or around the last week of the month of December in Sovryn Tech's history. And you can get a good history lesson around what is Saturnalia and what is Calendar. And, anyway, I always had a lot of fun doing those. Not going to do those this year, but it's a time of gift giving. Celebration, things like this. Some people celebrate in certain ways, some, in others. Some people are celebrating by putting gifts under a Christmas tree. Wait, oh shit, I said the word. Oh well. Anyway, some people, celebrate that way. Some people have orgies. Some people, really, no, I'm not kidding. All kinds of ways to get into the festivities. But I am and I did a review of this on some Zomia 1 Underground content a little while back. I actually use, for my telco, I use Google Fi. Now, I've talked about it. You're saying, wait, Stallion, don't you always say fuck Google? Yes, I do. My simple argument for using Google Fi is that, unfortunately, at this moment in time, I have to have a smartphone. Believe me, I wish I didn't. But I have to have one. And if I'm going to, might as well have all the data just go to one place. Since I'm going to use an Android phone anyway, just having it go to Google Fi, and it's set up with Google Fi's VPN and everything, it makes sure that the data is not going to other companies to schlep off. If it's going to go out there, I might as well, not make it easy for anyone to get as much as they can about me. But regardless, I am not saying to give Google money. I am just saying that That's an argument for it. Anyway, something Google can't seem to make money on, or at least by my impression, they seem to not be able to, is with their, with their smart home ambitions. Now, understand, because I got a gift. I got a gift from Google-Fi, and they sent me for free. Didn't charge me a cent. They didn't make me buy it and then reimburse me or anything like that. I got the email that said, hey, thank you for being a Google Fi subscriber. We'd like to send you a Nest Mini. Now, a Nest Mini is basically the smallest and latest version of Google's home technology, right? The Google Home, which is their competitor, quote unquote, because this isn't really a competitor, but it's their competitor to the Amazon Echo. So I finally got this in the mail. I've messed around with it a little bit. If you think I'm going to use this thing for long, you're fucking kidding yourself. I'll probably sell it on eBay in short order, like I do many things. But I checked it out, and I'm like, all right, let's see. Let me see if I plug this thing in and I give this thing a shot, am I just going to be so whiz-banged, oh, wow? And finally, will the man of tomorrow understand? This is why, goddammit, Stallions, please stop talking shit about IoT. Stop talking crap about it. I need it. It makes me feel so good inside, and I'm not alone. And I don't know, whatever the fuck people, whatever they think about this, okay? I was like, okay, maybe I'll finally get it. I'll finally understand this rampant appeal with one of these things. Well, first off, let me say this. The fact that, and this isn't the first offer I got, I got an offer for and I think you can still jump on this. If you sign up, now and I give Google credit for this, for their advanced protection program, right? Which is basically setting things up so that if you want to log into your Google account, you have to have some kind of hardware authentication, that being like a YubiKey or even Google's own Titan key. Now, I have set up the advanced protection program on my smartphones and everything. I have a YubiKey 5 that handles all the business. I set that up basically as soon as they started offering it. It's totally for free, and if you have to have a Google account, you might as well secure the goddamn fuck out of it, and this is the right way to do it, and I wish more companies would do this. But they don't. Whatever. Regardless, Google does it, so I take advantage of it. Now, they sent me an email, and they said, if you can get someone else to sign up for the Advanced Protection Program, we will send them for free a Google Titan key, and we'll send you, so the person I get to sign up, they get a Google Titan key, which is $50, and then Google will send me a Nest Mini, which is what, $30-$40, somewhere around in that price range. Now I can understand. Now, why would they do this? Okay. I think, what's the purpose of this offering? We need to talk about this. We're in the foreplay here. We got a lot of nice little stories to talk about. We're going to get into, before I go further, you just wait. We're going to get into the weird in this episode of Sovryn Tech. And I know longtime Sovryn Tech listeners love it when I get into the weird. We're going to get into the historical. And then we're going to get into what I consider to be batshit fucking insane, politically. But it has ramifications in the tech world, dramatic ramifications in the tech world. And then we might get into some blockchain news. We'll see how far we get. But anyway, let's keep going. So I think the real deal, the real reason they're doing this, one could say, like we talked about in, I think the last episode, was that episode 354 of Sovryn Tech? I can't believe that. We're in episode 355. Unbelievable. Anyway, in episode 354 of Sovryn Tech, we talked about this, that there are, at whatever company, pick your tech giant, whatever company it is, okay, the level of security that they will generally engage in is completely based around how expensive is it to implement a security strategy, and if it's cheaper for a data breach to occur than it is to set up a solid security strategy, they'll just let the data breach occur. Now, in fact, when I said this, I got some emails from some listeners who gave me some shit about that fact and basically said, no, that is not how cybersecurity teams, that's not what they operate under. Look, I applaud, okay? I applaud your faith, shall we say, in humanity. that somehow they do things based upon what's right and good, or that it's based upon what's best for everybody, because the more secure we all are, the more secure we all are, right? That's why I tell people to even get into the advanced protection program. It's not a bad thing. But no, I can tell you, and a lot of companies, unless their actual business model is or their business offering, as in the product, the service that they sell, is security, I guarantee you that, and even then sometimes I wonder, but I know for a fact that their CSOs ultimately pay fealty to the CEO and whatever mathematicians exist under him that make this budget call. I'm sorry. Get over it, okay? People do things based upon, what's the more expensive, or what's the least expensive option, I should say. You're just wrong. I wish that people just said, look, if this is how people operated, then I should see everybody, okay? And I live nearby some pretty populous cities, okay? And everybody, including, this is the Silicon Mill Yard. There's some serious tech companies here in New Hampshire, okay? And every single one of them, everybody that works at them, and I know who they are, I see them at the gym, and they want to chat up and blah, blah, blah. They should have fucking YubiKeys or Google Titan keys or what the fuck ever on their keychains, and they don't. Or they should have them around their neck, and I'll even ask them directly. And no, they don't have them. And yet it is positively essential, easy. It's what you should do. And all these companies are using G Suite. Everybody should be fucking locked down with, hardware authentication. But they don't do that. Why? Because I guarantee you it's because those companies, and again, I have verbal verification from some of them, those companies, it's actually cheaper for them to resolve a data breach on their servers than it is for them to lock it down. That's a fact. It's not a good one. It sucks, but that's a fact. And you can ask other security researchers. You don't just have to ask me. Go ahead, tweet at them. They're all there on Twitter. Half these guys, they'll tell you the score. Again, I applaud your belief in humanity, but it's not, as we learn, and as we'll learn throughout this episode, actually, especially when we get into HackSec, it's not well-founded. Regardless, I don't want to give, I give Google credit for offering for free the ability to lock down your accounts properly, right? By using, hardware authentication, a YubiKey, or whatever. And them wanting to incentivize you to get other people in the advanced protection program. Now, one could argue is that it is in Google's interests, and clearly it must have been, because we know that Google has, or we have the metric from Google that not a single Google employee has fallen to a phishing attack ever since they implemented requiring hardware authentication with YubiKeys or, whatever FIDO2 keys that they have set up at Google itself, at Google proper. So they have that set up. Now, is it within their, is it financially viable for them to try and get everybody on board with using a $50 Google Titan key that they'll give people for free for signing up to the Advanced Protection Program? Probably not. I would argue that the more important half of this deal is to give people a Nest Mini. Okay. And I'm going to talk about the Nest Mini here, and give you a little breakdown on it in just a second. But I really want to break this down. And them really, giving Nest Minis to people who are subscribers to Google Fi. That just makes all the sense in the world, because they're clearly people who are, or it would appear to be, for most people who are into Google Fi, they're already well established and, knee deep in Google's ecosystem. So they are likely going to use the Nest Mini. And, the more people that have Nest Minis, the more data that gets collected from Nest Minis, that A, shows well to investors, okay? B, gives the opportunity, and this is the important point to bring up, is that for the Google Home, we'll call it that. Nest is a big part of that. Of course, the company that they bought out, and then they're rebranding and all this stuff, and we'll talk about that. Okay, for the Google Home to work, to operate, for it to be what Google showed off as a company at its 10-4 event, 2-3 years ago, every single house, every single person on the planet for Google Assistant to become everything that it is, not just Google Home, everybody has to be using it for it to operate in the way that they have demoed off year after year. That's the dirty secret with all this. And it's an open secret because they basically tell you that at their events. The language is couched in such a way that I think a lot of people miss it. But there are other journalists besides myself who have absolutely recognized that that's exactly what they said, verbatim. That everybody's got to be on board with this for it to work. Now, I mean, again, the fortunate thing in all this is that, look, it really looks like they can't even give these things away. The Google Titan key, that sells fine. Like that's no loss leader. That thing sells beautifully, okay? The Nest Mini, now that's a loss leader. That's one where they'll take the hit on that just to get everybody in on it, right? Because they have to. For it to work the way that for the Google future that you see every time they hold one of these events or show you some dumbass commercial, for it to work, everybody's got to be on board, okay? But I feel hopeful that, like, it's so bad that so many people aren't getting into Google Home, partly, or the Nest Mini. And that, of course, that's partly because why? Most people have already bought Echoes from Amazon, right? Or maybe they're getting in or they have a Fire TV, which is an Echo, basically. Or they're getting into whatever Apple's doing, whatever that case may be. They literally cannot give these things away. I mean, they're trying to. Now, I took one. Like I said, I'm probably going to sell it right back off, but I took one. And I'll take another and I'll sell it off again. It's pretty crazy. So, but anyway, to talk about these things. Okay, now let's talk about the name, Nest Mini. Of course, this is a rebrand because originally, what was it, like the Home Mini or whatever? This is the second generation one, so this is the latest. They're going with the branding of Nest because Nest in your home has a longer history and more name cachet, quite frankly. Has more name cachet in, with homeowners, right? Because they either have the Nest thermostat or whatever other horseshit Nest has put out there, even before they were owned by Google, and certainly what they put out there after. So calling it the Nest Mini instead of the Home Mini, I don't know. Maybe there's some other psychological things within that, but that's certainly a psychological trick. I got to tell you, the pluses. Let's talk about the good things first, right? So it is pretty amazing how many apps this actually works with. It really can. Like, suddenly it just starts playing podcasts or music, and it works with most apps as far as those go. The sound that comes out of it, and the thing looks like a hockey puck made out of, I don't know, like a felt. It's again, it feels amazingly premium for what it is. It really is just a speaker, though, isn't it? But, the sound is pretty good. I mean, it fills the room fairly well. I was shocked by actually just how good it did sound. So I'll give it that. The other thing is that it has, as far as I can tell, this is a full-on hardware switch built into it where you absolutely cut off power to the microphone. Microphone is dead when you hit that switch. I got to give them credit for that, because in a world where we're dying from a lack of hardware switches, as I say often on this show, they put it in. Now, my understanding is that apparently generations of Alexa also have this very hard hardware switch. Again, the difference between a hard switch and a soft switch is just something in software that tells you it's off, which that's available as well in the Google Home app, which I surprisingly already had installed, but that's only because I've been testing out a Chromecast lately for, of course, Disney Plus. But I was impressed by the hardware switch in that, and when that microphone's off, it is fucking off, and doesn't matter how much you yell at it. And certainly you could feel pretty good if you tried yelling at one of these things, hoping Google would hear you. I mean, you can only imagine the things that I said to it, but it does not react at all. So also, if you're an abusive motherfucker, I imagine that it'd be all right for you too. Wow, that was dark. Didn't mean to go there. But anyway, it can tell you the weather. It can do all these other little things that you mentioned to it. It can tell you, it can answer a question. I mean, it's basically trying to be what Google has been trying to get people on board with Google Home with and Google Assistant in general for a long time. It's basically the Star Trek computer, and that's what they're shooting for. The thing is that it became immediately apparent to me that as I was interacting with this device, did I suddenly feel like, wow, this is really cool. I am in the future. It's so awesome to be able to talk out loud and say things. A couple things came to mind for me. One, I don't care to have people know every little thing that I'm doing. And I'm not talking about people knowing what I'm doing as in Google knowing what I'm doing or the NSA knowing what I'm doing. I'm talking about just people around me. Okay? Like I mean, the stuff that I even though there's an old saying in writing that you're either a planner or a pantser, right? You either plan things out with, really dramatic outline or really hardcore outlines, or you go by the seat of your pants. Now, as a writer, I'm a pantser, but in other aspects of life, I am very much a planner. Okay, I think things out, research things very deeply. I do not. I mean, I can instinctually react, but I do not react quickly to things. And in fact, I try not even to react. I'm more, into action, intrinsic. And I don't really care for people to always know what I'm doing. And part of that also comes from that I like to surprise people. And I mean, interacting verbally eliminates a lot of that. And I can only imagine how much people in a nearby vicinity, especially if I lived in the city or something, where, people are so close by hearing you through the walls what you got going on. So I didn't dig that. But here's the other part. And this is the part where I was a little unimpressed. Not with the Nest Mini. I was unimpressed with myself. Okay? And how I was unimpressed with myself was that, and I've brought this point up before, a lot of these IoT technologies, Nest Mini, and there's a slew of others, in fact, many of them made by Google, including Google Glass, what really hits home is when you try to think of things, or when you just do what you could possibly have a Nest Mini do for you. Or when you try to think of things to justify, perhaps you didn't get your Nest Mini for free. Perhaps you purchased one. And you just want to you're just trying to think of how to justify that purpose. Think of things that it can do to justify it, right? You find out very quickly how not so fun your life is. And in fact, if you're out doing, or not, maybe not fun, but how unexciting. Because my life is very fun. Actually, my life's very exciting as well. But it's not varied, it's not novel. Okay, like a lot of aspects of my life. And this is the point that I've brought up, and the sense of this, it doubled down for me when I was trying to interact with the Nest Mini. And that is that, yeah, we have these technologies that feel like the science fiction future that we've seen on TV or in movies for however many decades. Okay, like trying to talk to the Star Trek computer. The thing is that we, in our lives, don't do the things we're not traveling the galaxy, in a starship. Okay, we're not landing on alien worlds like Gropos and going to town and doing Halo, or hopefully we never do that. Whatever the fuck the case. Like so many things, all these exciting things that these technologies exist for that do really awesome shit in the movies and TV. We don't live in those awesome universes. You understand? And so it drives home just how it's not, I use the word unimpressive by comparison, relatively to what is seen in the movies, how unimpressive our lives are. And so these technologies are basically meaningless. And I think, after using them, I'm not a believer. The only thing I believe in now is that people are just more and more trying to hide. They're trying to put up a smokescreen over just how shitty their realities are. Whether they're trying to ignore what's happening outside of them, or they're trying to ignore what's happening inside of them. Probably more of the latter. And sadly, they are using technology to fill in these tragic gaps. And what a pity. Really, I know the Nest Mini isn't the full-on Google Home or whatever, but it was hard. The best thing that it could do was, again, like play a podcast or an audiobook or a song when I told it to. But then you don't need the entire power of Google's server farms to do that. Like, if that's the positives, great, I hear you. Those are the positives. But then, like, what are the negatives? And the negatives aren't just some black cloud hanging over those fun things you get to do with it. No, the negatives are a fucking black hole, sucking in the light of all that. I don't get it, folks. I get it and we've talked about this, okay, when we were talking about Alexa recently. I get it if you're disabled. Yep, I totally, in whatever capacity, where having a hands-free UI, okay, or a non-visual UI, etc., allows you to interact with the world, appreciate art, whatever. You know what? Dynamite. But how many people is that? How many people do we really need all the data collected in the world to empower that many people with that? I don't think so, because I think also those people, a lot of what they do for a good time is often, seniors and whatever, and this is no knock, not even close. It's simple, and I say that in the most respectful and, dare I say, jealous ways. I wish that all I wanted to do, or all I had to do, were some of the simple things that people that can actually make use of something like an SME, that's what I was into, right? Oh yeah, I just want to enjoy a song and I don't want to have a computer. Boy, I can feel that one. I can feel that one hard. So I get it. I get it that there are people where a device like this can be very useful, helpful, and give them access to amazing aspects of the world today. I really, really get that. But let's be clear here that this technology, the dichotomy, it's not even a paradox, because a paradox would mean that it's okay, and I don't. Okay. The dichotomy here is that, okay, there is a very select group, unless Google thinks that there's going to be a significantly larger group of people, which if that's the case, then we got to ask ourselves whole other things as a species. There is a select, and no one's making fun of seniors, no one's making fun of disabled people at all. I'm just saying there is a select group, there is a percentage of the population that this works for. But for this to work, there's no insults here on people. I'll insult Google all day long. But for this to work, it requires everybody to use it. That's the rub. For it to do what it purports, everything that it purports. If it's just going to play music for people, it doesn't have to be this. That's the rub. But they don't tell you that. Instead, they just tell you, oh, look what it allows this person to do, right? For it to do what it needs to do, everybody has to have one. So it cannot be just for a certain percentage that I'm glad gets to do what they do with these things. Okay, but it cannot be for that. It can't just be for that certain percentage. And for everybody else outside of that, you're just handing over everything. I'm impressed that it has a hardware cutoff switch. I really am. Like that was very un-Google of Google to include that in there. Obviously, I get why they did. And actually in the paperwork in the box, constant references talking about we care about your privacy and everything, which is absolute horseshit, because if Google cared about your privacy in any real way, they wouldn't be in business. They couldn't be. But regardless, I don't get it. I don't understand how this is somehow vastly improving my life to justify the data, the amount of things that I hand over to Google. I tried. I tried to enter the 21st century. I tried to leave my comfort zone of the 1990s, and I found it very wanting. I found it very... talk about unimpressive. I found it unimpressive, uninspiring. Sell it to me. I get emails from a lot of listeners saying, well, Brian, you don't know because you haven't tried it out. Okay, well, now I have. Now what? Tell me. I mean, the real problem is that, okay, you could say there's people who get to take advantage of it, but the problem also is that, there are people who get to make the choice of using it, but then anybody else, you don't really have the choice of not using it. You have the choice to use it, but you really don't have the choice not to use it. Does that make sense? I know that might sound paradoxical, but the reason being is that, people all over the place have these things, and as Google's own head of devices said, you should tell people when they enter your home whether or not you have a voice assistant of some kind. Okay, if you have Alexa, Google Assistant, even though we all have those in our pockets, so I guess we got to tell everybody. Okay, but we know we should tell people, okay, that we've got these things, and it is becoming increasingly harder for people who don't want to take part in this, I mean, if I want to get conspiratorial, this experiment on civilization with all these voice assistants. The people that don't want to take part in it don't really have a choice to not take part in it because the very nature of these devices is that even though they have hardware switches, I bet there's some kind of data point that gets sent to Google or Amazon or whoever has these as to how many times these things are switched off. I'm sure that kind of data gets collected. I would be very intrigued to know what those statistics look like, but I bet most people don't even bother. I bet. Now, I really wish that this stuff was in smartphones, quite frankly. But again, because of that, we don't get to opt out of, this surveillance network that is, all these Nest Minis and Amazon Echoes and everything else. And somehow I feel like that's not okay. I don't know why I would possibly feel that way. Apparently I'm insane, according to emails that I've gotten, that I'm not okay with it, but, well, okay. Anyway, it'd be great if smartphones would have these things. In fact, it speaks to, and this is going to get into another story we have here for the Foreplay. It speaks to what Osterloh was really, what Rick Osterloh, head of devices at Google, when he said that, wow, you really should tell people, when you have these kinds of devices. The fact that, or, when you have voice assistants and you walk into their home. Osterloh completely sidestepped, and I would say on purpose, completely sidestepped the fact that every smartphone is listening. And yes, they are, whether it's using Siri or Google Assistant or I don't know, what's Samsung's thing? Bixby? Whatever. Okay? Or maybe Cortana? Probably not. But he completely sidestepped that. And I think in the same sense, Google admitting that, you should have a hardware switch for cutting off, and in other devices that have video cameras, they have hardware switches that turn off those as well. So basically, this will go for laptop manufacturers as well, that increasingly our devices that have cameras and microphones should have hardware switches that cut it off. If the verbiage that gets used for these voice assistants is something that companies implement across the board, but they don't. That's a problem. Okay, now it used to be able to get a ThinkPad, and ThinkPads had hardware cutoff switches for at least the microphone. They might not have had for the camera. I'm running off of memory here, but or they'd have hardware switches for the Wi-Fi or whatever. Great. Then those eventually turned into soft switches, where it was still like a actual like plastic switch on the side of the laptop, but it really only told the operating system to do something. It didn't actually power down or cut off microphone. And in that sense, it's really still just a soft switch, right? And that's kind of pointless. Now, fortunately, maybe people are starting to realize that this is a very real problem. Again, clearly Google and Amazon know that it is. They offer it in some devices, but in devices where I would argue that it's even more important, right? Ones that have battery, etc., they are not. However, enter a very interesting device. Now, there's the company Purism, which they have for, a few years now. Of course, they have their Librem laptops. Those all have hard cutoff switches. They have their Librem 5, their Linux phone. That has a hardware cutoff switch. But now let's talk about, here's the thing. Those come at a premium. And I'm not saying I have a problem with that. I don't. So what about for the masses, where I would argue this really matters? We've got an entry. Let's talk about it. So we get to talk about something that, boy, I don't know when the last time was. I guess, well, it would have been the Librem 5, which did kind of come out finally in September of 2019. There will be more available in 2020 because I think they already sold their stock. Well and good. I know the price is going to go up. Effectively right now, a Librem 5 phone costs $800. That is, like we talked about in just the past couple episodes of Sovryn Tech, that's not outrageous, right? Because for this technology to actually be sold at cost, not at cost with adware and selling off your data and all that, which allows a phone to maybe sell for a couple $100, or if it has a lot of super premium and new technologies, AR stuff and whatever, then it can cost, those kinds of phones. Like, for example, a Galaxy S10 should probably sell for more like $3,000. Instead, it only sells for $1,000 to $1,500, and mainly that's because the cost of that gets offset by a lot of data collection and other deals that get made with the manufacturer. Okay, so the Librem 5 costing $800, well, yeah, that makes sense. That's not crazy. Now, what's really interesting is this new entrant in the smartphone game, which I don't think is going to be available until 2020. But let's talk about it. It is the Pine phone. Now, we covered the Pine Book. In fact, I have the Pine Book. I have a Pine Book. There's also the Pine Book Pro, which came out this year. Both very interesting devices built on top of just simple onboard computers. Of course, the Pine 64, that is similar to the Raspberry Pi. Now, these are computers that are, to most people's mind, even if they don't know the specs or the numbers, these are severely underpowered devices. But they are able to sell at cost because of, well, the whole process that it takes to make them and what comprises them. So there's no crazy deal as to why Raspberry Pis cost $35. That is literally a $35 computer. Sure, well, actually, the price has gone up, the more you, like when you put in more RAM or whatever, a better processor, whatever ends up in the latest Raspberry Pi 4, right? Because now to get the Raspberry Pi 4, the high-end model of that is closer to $50. It's not $35 anymore. Anyway, the Pine phone. This is something that is able to exist at $150, partly because, of course, it is coming from a Chinese company, and the regulations are such over there that, well, frankly, they can get away with this. And also, they have very limited runs and are probably using a lot of, aftermarket's not the term, but they're probably using parts that are, they got on some kind of wholesale deal because no other phone is actually using them. So let's talk about the specs of the Pine phone, but it's $150. You're going to, as far as I understand it, now there is a guy out there who actually put out a review of it and he loved it. And it has the kill switches for Wi-Fi, for cell signal, camera, speaker, microphone. Right on. That you want to be able to just cut all of that off. I tried to look and see if it does have Bluetooth 4.0. There's no physical cutoff for that. I wonder about that, but there should be a kill switch for Bluetooth, but we'll see what happens when we actually get some production models in hands. But it has basically a 6-inch LCD IPS screen. Of course, it's not, QHD, which is great. That's probably part of the reason the price can actually be so low. It has a company I've never heard of, All-Winner A64 1.2 gigahertz quad-core processor. Again, just some little company that's probably putting out some loose stock. You get 2 gig of RAM in it, a 16 gig onboard storage. Of course, this is what allows it to be $150. And it has Bluetooth 4.0, Wi-Fi. It doesn't have Wi-Fi AC. It stops at N, right? Is that Wi-Fi 4 now? Is that what the new protocol calls it? But it has, GPS, has micro SD card slot, and it handles a mini SIM. So this is basically like an Android Go phone. That's how it's actually at cost at $150. It does not come, here's the rub, for right now anyway, It does not come with its own operating system, but there are other people, homebrew communities, open source community, and so on. I'm sure some businesses want to jump on it, that are developing operating systems that can do a whole lot more for this Pine phone. And that's cool. Okay, like that's the way you want, that's how you want this to get developed. Okay. And those are still a bit out yet, but basically, yes, this is a $150 smartphone that is open source. You can put multiple different, again, many operating systems are getting developed for this. So you're going to have your choice of operating systems. It has kill switches. Again, the hardware is open source. If we're going to have a smartphone, this is the direction you want to look at. But is it going to take off? Well, that's the debate, right? Because you're not going to have your banking app. You're not going to have Instagram is probably not going to be on there. Maybe you could work through the website. Maybe we're going to talk about that in a second in another quick story in the Foreplay. But yeah, where are the apps? And if there's no apps, well, you're kind of screwed. I mean, frankly, if they can get Telegram, maybe Signal, and a couple other things, I'd be all right. I'd be okay with having the Pine phone. And as far as, I mean, it does have GPS on it as far as what map apps. I mean, you can put awesome, OSM and on there. And there you go. We might actually have a smartphone that respects, to some degree, your privacy. And again, a big part of it, having kill switches and at a price that anybody could jump in on. You don't have to be paying out the premium like for the Librem 5. And I'm not knocking the Librem 5 because of that. This gets interesting. Now, again, as I've said before, like there are major psychological problems. It's not even a matter of tech. There are psychological issues with being constantly connected, always on, and getting notifications all the time, blah, blah, blah. Those are genuine issues that we have to resolve. But as far as having a smartphone that does a lot of the hardware right, this is one of the closer examples that I've seen. But again, there are psychological issues with the smartphone that maybe make the smartphone impractical and a problem regardless. And, it's a bullshit market or an unhealthy market. But that is a different conversation. Regardless, I appreciate what PinePhone's putting out there. I am a big fan of the Pinebook. I'm a big fan of the Pinebook Pro. I think that is doing a lot of things right. I mean, this is the kind of hardware that in the world we're in is definitely helpful and steps in the right direction. So I do appreciate that. I put a link in the show notes if you want to check it out. And, you got to keep in mind, so there's the psychological aspects of it, okay? But you also have to keep in mind that even when you have privacy-respecting hardware and software, let's say, you still have the concern that, well, how do you get this thing to make phone calls? Oh, you got to go through a telco, don't you? You got to go through Verizon. You got to go through AT&T. You got to go through Sprint, T-Mobile, whatever. Whoever it is, Google Fi. Whoever it is that you have to go through. And they are going to, I mean, you can run a VPN to some degree, but there is a lot of data collection that's going to go on there. There might be solutions to try and mitigate that a bit, but that is a reality. So there's still data collection going on in many ways, regardless of what you do. And so, again, I could picture, especially, when did I talk about this? I talked about this on a Zomi One Underground episode. Like there's some VPN solutions like with WireGuard where I could see if you have a real Linux-based operating system on here that you might be able to really secure a lot of the data. I think there'd still be issues with metadata, GPS, and so on that probably your telcos might take advantage of. But it would be a little bit of work to get it there, but that's something to consider as well. Don't think that just because you have a privacy-respecting phone that suddenly you're in the clear. Oh no, there's a lot that needs to be done underneath all of that, because the telcos are, well, they're always watching, and that's just a fact. So anyway, but the Pine phone, I mean, this is definitely a step in the right direction. I dig it. I like where it's going. I think the price puts it in a position. Again, they have to be able to produce as much because sure, Pine, the company behind Pine 64, they've put out $100 laptops that work, like the Pinebook or the $200 Pinebook Pro. But then they are a small operation. They can only produce so much. So your network effect runs into a bottleneck, right? Like, I mean, they'd have to make so many of these, for in many ways for it to matter. But for those of us that care, at least it's out there. And I'm certainly intrigued and interested in getting my hands on one. Now, another issue that could occur, and, with even if you are using the right hardware and the right software, here is a reality that some people are experiencing. And this is a story that started around mid-December that people were reporting this. And that is users who use Linux, okay, that also happen to want to go to various Google services like, I don't know, half the internet. Because it seems like half the internet is Google services, right? Gmail, Google Search, YouTube, etc. If you were using, and I applaud you, if you were using alternative browsers, web browsers, and I don't mean Firefox. Firefox didn't have this issue. But if you were using, say, Falcon or Conqueror, there's a bunch of these out there, these nice little niche Linux web browsers. I'm a fan. I'm a big fan of some of them, especially Conqueror if I'm ever on a KDE system, like I'm there. But if you're using those, you couldn't log into Google services. In fact, you couldn't even really get to the sites for them. Now, it gets really nasty because if you just changed, if you went, dug a little deeper on web browser settings, okay, as in if you went into the settings and you changed the user agent, okay, for the web browser to make it say Firefox, even though you're using Conqueror, suddenly you could get to YouTube, Gmail, Google, whatever. So there's no real, and color me conspiratorial on this one, because there's no real technological reason why this was occurring. And it was very widespread, okay, where a lot of people who use these niche browsers, again, and we're talking about browsers that are up to date, they're putting in the latest standards, okay, and they are, they're actively developed. I get it. Okay, so Google services wouldn't work on Netscape Navigator 4.0. I would not be colored surprised, okay, if that were the case. Like, no shit. But these are up to date, again, web standards compliant web browsers where just because it was this niche browser, and you could open up right next to it, side by side, have Firefox going, or maybe even you have Google Chrome, and whatever Google service you went to, it would open up, it'd go there instantly. But you try doing it with a niche browser and it would say no. Now, we've talked about this, and Firefox, or Mozilla, I should say, actually did a whole write-up about this on a different level, basically suggesting, and that was just this year, I think it was, that they were writing up and saying that, hey, there are abilities, say, that the YouTube website has that only work in Google Chrome, and they will not work in Firefox. They won't work in Edge. They won't work in Opera. And that's a problem too, because Opera, and in fact, they specifically, and users that were reporting this, there were Chromium-based browsers, okay, Blink engine browsers, where this still, if it was a problem with the engine that they were using, the web engine that they were using, okay, that would make sense. That would be a technological reason. Okay, so it's not Chromium-based, so you can't use Google services. That's bad enough, and that's what Firefox or Mozilla was basically warning about, that Firefox would kind of be left in the dust because it's not Chromium-based. But that's not what's going on at all, because, again, as long as you switch the user agent, suddenly they would work fine, including when the user agent was set to Firefox. So this points at that Google can basically tell a web browser, you can trick it if you know what you're doing, but Google could tell a web browser, oh, you're not using Chrome? Well, you don't get to use Google services. And so, when we bring up something like the Pine phone, where, again, you can have all of the great, you can have all the hardware, all the privacy respecting hardware, you can have all the kill switches, oh, it's so dynamite, you can have a great operating system, blah, 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 that's awesome. You could even have a web browser on that great Pine phone operating system, whatever it happens to be, that's Linux-based. You could even have, a Chromium-based web browser installed on there. But 5% of the code, or of the code that Google Chrome runs on, is not open source and is not shared with every other Chromium-based web browser. We know this, okay? That even with Microsoft Edge, you're only getting 95% basically of what Google develops for Chromium-based, or for the Chromium web engine, or Blink in this case. There's 5% that you don't get. That 5% gives Google absolute control over whether or not, and actually it even goes beyond that, because again, Firefox was allowed to do this, but if you had any niche web browser, my point being is that, great, we can have all the open source software, we can have all of the, all the great hardware and everything, but if Google says you don't get to access our services, you're fucked. All because you're just using because you don't want to use Google Chrome, and I don't blame you. Why would you? Well, I know why you would. And it's the same argument I've given over the years of why people still use Google Chrome, because Google gives very specific abilities to Chrome as based on Google services and apps that are online. So of course, and I mean, even on an Android smartphone, right? I mean, you have Chrome ready because sometimes apps want to automatically go to that for authentication. And if Firefox is your main web browser on your Android device, you won't be able to log in with Google, or, you're going to lose functionality when that happens. And that's a problem. So all of this is to say, to reiterate the point, having the open source hardware is great, having the open source software is great, but we also need alternative services that play nice with no matter what gets, whatever web browser is being used, whatever hardware is being used at it. And that's the part where this is going to get really hard. And there are solutions. I appreciate actually the Librem 5. Of course, Purism came out with their own Librem suite that you pay in $7 a month to get email, basically social media of a kind, and it's all stuff that's built into their own suite, and a chat messenger and all that. That's fine. Okay, if that's the direction we're going to go to be able to fund that sort of thing, we're not going to fund it by collecting data like every fucking app that you use on your smartphone does. We're going to fund it by just charging a monthly subscription fee. If that's how it's got to go to have these alternative services, dynamite. And in fact, I can imagine that Purism would have no problem with, Librem Mail and Librem Chat and all that stuff being ported and working with the PinePhone. Okay, but we got to keep that in mind. That, it's nice that we can have all this stuff working, again, on the open source hardware and open source software, but then the services have to actually be able to work on these things. And Google looks like they are experimenting with being kind of nasty and cutting out certain players and competitors. And we either start using those alternatives or we maybe stop watching YouTube. Imagine that. Well, anyway, all right. I got to move on from that stuff. A little bit of other good news. I think the PinePhone is great news. But a little other good news is that Tails 4.1.1 is out. If you haven't updated to Tails 4, I felt like major speed improvements when they upgraded to Tails 4. And I like the UI. The UI is a little slicker too. But they have now implemented KeyPass XC into Tails. So now you can keep all your... I keep a persistent partition on my Tails drive, and now you can store all of your passwords right in there and use them with KeyPass XC. I think that's a very nice touch. It's something that should be available in a great alternative operating system. So anyway, I was excited about that. There's not a whole lot to say about it, but good news. Certainly very, very good news. So I was going to open up with this, and I didn't because we ended up getting on a tirade about the Nest Mini, and I apologize. Because apparently people are sick and tired of me talking about privacy, so okay. But anyway, it's only your life. Who cares? But I was amazed by this. Speaking of software, this is a nice way to kind of lead out of this. Speaking of software, there is a group that developed a version of Slack. Fuck Slack, but a version of Slack that works on and is designed for Windows 3.11. Now, a lot of people know Windows 3.1. Of course, that was the last version of Windows up to Windows 95. Well, not counting any Windows NT or anything like that. But Windows 3.1, of course, that was the first Windows I ever can really remember using. I'm sure it's giving some people the warm fuzzies out there listening to my voice, or maybe it's giving you night sweats. I don't know. But regardless, Windows 3.11 was known as Windows for Workgroups. Okay, so this was something that was meant to be used. It wasn't really to connect to the internet so much, but certainly within a company intranet. Okay, it was really meant for that. And so having Slack available for that sort of thing, that doesn't mean that Windows 3.11 couldn't connect to the internet. In fact, I think that was possible. I mean, you got to understand, Internet Explorer didn't become a thing until well into Windows 95. Really, Windows 95 is like, it was part of a plus pack, if I'm not mistaken. But anyway, I think about Windows 3.1 and I loved it. I mean, even that blue box, opening screen was, anyway, the logo at the beginning there, I just think about that and I'm getting the warm fuzzies. Anyway, Slack, they wrote, I mean, this is amazing to consider that you could write software. I mean, you think about Slack and everything that Slack can do, and certainly I think that and actually I know I took a look at it, there are features that Slack as you know it on whatever operating system you happen to run Slack or whatever device, that it can't do. I mean, it's not so much the emoji or, doing the calls, because like Slack can do, audio calls now. A lot of those more advanced abilities, they're not there. But as far as getting into various Slack channels and groups, it can definitely do that. You can message very easily. It looks like Windows 3.1, obviously. But what amazed me the most about this is that the ability to use one of the most popular team and chat apps in the world, if not the most popular, that it could all be done in an app the size, ready for this? The size of the app is 64K. Not 64 meg. That's not unheard of. Only 64K. That's crazy. And all it says to me when I read this, I was just like, oh man, we've got all of our software, all of our apps. I mean, I already knew this, but it just really drove it home. Like, we have it so wrong. We could write all this stuff to be so lightweight and run so efficiently and so fast. And fuck, we don't, And it's not because, I mean, the only thing they were really hindered by wasn't necessarily file size, right? They were hindered by, basically the technical abilities of Windows 3.11 itself. Okay, so that's where a lot of feature sets couldn't come in. So, but if you had more protocols built into the operating system that would allow it to do more, I mean, then what would it be 128K if it could do the audio calls and like share files? So what? Great. Have this nice clean code that is really lightweight. Oh, I thought it was so funny to see that. And it just shows the amount of bloat that we have with a lot of computing power. And the problem that speaks to, we're not going to be able to get to it in this episode, or, maybe any. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get to it in a future episode either, because we have so many stories to get into. But there was the recent exploit against Intel chips. And it's basically any Intel chip, I think, from Skylake up, called Plundervolt. Okay, this reminds you of Spectre and Meltdown. It's kind of similar. I mean, it's not similar in application, but it's similar in the abstract. And Plundervolt, and even Spectre and Meltdown, a lot of these exploits at that, at the processor level, okay, they are possible, or they take advantage of the processor and get right at the kernel. They are possible, or at the BIOS. They are possible because Intel or AMD, a lot of it's Intel, maybe AMD has some similar issues, and just AMD isn't as, nobody looks at AMD as hard, so you're, as much as like people look at Intel, because Intel's the big boy on the block. So, maybe just AMD doesn't get attacked enough. Maybe they have the same amount of problems. I can't really say. In general, I like to buy AMD processors because it seems to always be the case that they're a little tighter on security standpoint. But regardless, modern processors, to reach the speeds that they reach, okay, and to do as much as they do, certainly at the size that they are, because they keep getting smaller, they are able to do this because, frankly, there's a lot of tricks and, dare I say, cheats that, like hyperthreading and all these other things that aren't actually raw speed. They are tricks to make it seem like there is more speed. And, I was listening to an episode of Security Now, my favorite podcast. And Steve Gibson, very, very, as he is often well-spoken, he very, very well said that, okay, guys, like, we've got all this speed in these machines, like this, and if I'm misquoting him, he can correct me, but he's basically saying, it's like, okay, everything's fast enough. That's good. Now, how about we secure this shit? Of course, what we're realizing is with Plundervolt, with, Spectre and Meltdown and all this, at the processor level, that we would probably have to do a lot of, we'd have to take a good 20 steps back to secure these things properly, but we'd be taking 20 steps back in speed. But then, this is my point, is that if we can get something so modern like Slack to work at a simple 64K, okay, and an app that clean, that small, that lightweight, we don't need all this speed. I've brought this point up so many times. Like I used to talk about, oh man, in fact, actually I was talking to Ellen about this the other day. One of my favorite things that used to be a thing in 2008 is portable apps. Okay, portable apps is the name of it was portableapps.com. And what it was, and you could run it in Wine if you needed to, but it was meant to run in Windows. And basically you would install an operating system, more or less on top of an operating system. You would install this onto a flash drive. And then it would be the platform that you could install portable apps onto, web browsers, whatever, okay? And you could put this into any computer, and there you go. You would have all of you didn't need cloud computing. Your flash drive was basically your computer. And as long as you had a Windows machine or something running Wine in front of you, you could just, plug it in and boom, there you go. You could have Skype running portably. You could have all these different apps running portably. It was such a cool idea. And the amazing thing about it was at the time, now I think portable apps is probably still developed, but years ago, at the time, you could get Firefox, the modern version of Firefox, okay, and let's set the Wayback Machine to like 2012, I think, when portableapps.com might have still been relevant and cloud computing as a concept hadn't exactly taken over yet, or as a buzzword, I should say, because we've really always had cloud computing in thin clients. It's always sort of been a thing. But you could run Firefox at that time, modern Firefox, you could run that on a Windows 95 machine. Now, why the hell was that possible, and why weren't we doing that in the first place? Because it would run so smooth and so fast. Because even the operating system was so lightweight. We've got... I could go a lot of places with this, but it really is a problem. And a lot of it has to do with shitty coders and engineers, quite frankly. I'm not saying everybody needs to be writing in assembly language, but man, are we missing out, and are we paying the price? All because we write these bloated goddamn operating systems and apps that, we've got to have processors that, 8-core processors that do 3.2 gigahertz and all this crap, and we need, 32 gig of RAM and all this shit, when that's not really necessary. And again, what is the cost? I'm trying to think of, it was the movie Soldier with Kurt Russell, one of my favorites of all time. It's actually a Blade Runner side quilt. Anyway, his sergeant, basically, the lead character there, Kurt Russell, his sergeant basically said, what is the cost of all that speed? Well, the cost of all this speed is a lack of security. Not that doesn't play against what I call the 10th law of thermodynamics, right? It's a little bit of a twist on it, but the idea that there's convenience and security, I would argue there's speed and there's security, and I don't know that one can really be the other. Okay, based on what people are going for when you start adding in, it highlighted so much for me how bloated so much of our shit is today, if I want to get, and we've already done this a couple times this episode, if I want to get conspiratorial, it's not that the stuff is bloated. It's that it's doing it. These apps are so huge because they're doing things that we don't necessarily know that they're doing. And it's, say, collecting data or whatever else that we're just not aware. And it's happening, right underneath. And when, again, these apps don't need to do all this, and they don't need to be the ridiculous size and the resource hogs that they are. But anyway, wow, I went really, really long with the foreplay on this one, and I have so many great stories I want to get into. I think I'm going to have to save one of them for the next episode, that being the U.S. Space Force, which that is a real thing, and what a fucking joke. But We'll talk about that when we get to it. No, folks, I'm not kidding. It's literally a sixth branch of the U.S. military. It's called the Space Force. It just got signed in. In fact, on the equinox, which is, or I'm sorry, not the equinox, the winter solstice. A little weird, but we'll just run with it. So anyway, before we get into any other stories, there is a story I want to get to. It's a story of the strange, and we got to touch on it, and I want to get to it. But before I do, you know what could solve a whole lot of this is if we just got together in person. You know what I mean? We're right in front of each other, and we don't need to use a Nest Mini to know what's going on. We're actually in touch with reality, or there's people right in front of us, so we don't have to use our smartphone, even though amazingly it looks like a lot of people do. But just to talk to the person right in front of them, they got to use a smartphone. I mean, well, there's times for that, right? Trying to be sexy, you know, maybe send a little sext or something like that. I mean, that works. But in general, you know, if somebody's right in front of you, why don't you talk to them? Well, how about you get together in meat space? Okay, and actually work on your goals and dreams in that way. You know, a great way to do that? I did that about 8 years ago, and I have never looked back. I moved from New York, yep, the Empire State, fitting name. I moved from New York to New Hampshire for something called the Free State Project. Now, you got to understand, the Free State Project, not a political organization. The Free State Project's purpose is to get at least 20,000 like-minded individuals together in one geographic area to work towards the concept of liberty in your lifetime. Who doesn't want that? Maybe there are people out there that don't, but I know I want that. I'm pretty sure you want that. It's part of the reason you're listening to this show, because you want privacy. You want things that respect you as a human being. Well, let me tell you, participants of the Free State Project, they are all about that, all about respecting each other as human beings. So that's why I came here, found an amazing community that, well, I mean, frankly, I don't know if Sovryn Tech would be here without the Free State Project. And you can join, you can be a part of it too. There's actually already well over 20,000 signers. There's 24,000 some odd signers. FSP.org, that's FSP as in Free State Project, FSP.org/join. Go there and you can join and maybe one day move to New Hampshire and you get to hang out with the Golden Stallion. What the hell? You get to hang out with all kinds of cool people. There are events happening here, hundreds of events, frankly, hangouts, everything all year long. You know, if you're feeling alone where you are, in your, you know, in your ideological persuasion, you're feeling alone, give the Free State Project a try. FSP.org/join. There's people here already waiting for you, waiting to hang out and work towards liberty in your lifetime. Free State Project, FSP.org/join. I thank them for sponsoring Sovryn Tech. Now, why don't we go ahead and hit a quick break, and then I'm going to come back, and like I said, we are going to get into the strange. Let's do it. Hey, if you have a project that needs reliable cryptocurrency data, check out blocktap.io. Blocktap.io is a universal cryptocurrency API. You can get historical prices for Bitcoin and other digital assets that you can use to build charts and do market analysis. Blockchain data is also indexed, so you can get transaction statistics, address balances, and more for Bitcoin and other networks. Blocktap.io is free for personal use, and you don't even need to create an account to access the API. To get started, try some of the example queries on the homepage at blocktap.io. Again, that's blocktap.io, blocktap.io, and we thank them for sponsoring Sovryn Tech. Woo! Let's get back to the show.
HackSec.
Before we get into the strange, got to tell you real quick, another Sovryn Tech sponsor, Vaultoro, Vaultoro.com, Vaultoro.com. Why is it called Vaultoro? Because oro is Spanish for gold, and it's a vault, so Vaultoro, gold vault, but it's so much more. Because Vaultoro is a company that's been around since 2015, and they have been in knee-deep, purpose-built for the cryptocurrency blockchain space. And you get to do play action with cryptocurrencies, gold. You can set up your gold wallet in seconds. You just go to Vaultoro.com. You make it happen. They have so many things going on there. They are all about getting money into the future. Talk about things getting into the 21st century. These are people who are interested in getting money into the future. They really are. And that's why they're so supportive of cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin, you name it. Go check it out, Vaultoro.com. And I thank them for sponsoring Sovryn Tech. I'm telling you, it's a company I trust. I absolutely trust. And I don't say that. I really don't say that often in the blockchain space. Okay. But this is one where I do. I've known them for years. They're the top stuff. And you got to appreciate them supporting independent voices like Sovryn Tech. So that's it. Which, by the way, let's get a Bitcoin wallet developed for the Pine Phone. Can we talk to the guys at Mycelium about that? Or whoever. Let's make that, or Electrum. Let's make that happen. Anyway, let's get into the weird, shall we? We need to get into the strange. It's been a long time. Got a lot of tech news. Let's get into the odder stuff. We're probably not going to get to actually, I did have a blockchain story I wanted to get into, but we can save that for the next episode, and we won't get into the U.S. Space Force, and there's a climax I've been wanting to do for so long, but we're not going to go there either, so consider this your quasi story of the week, climax, whatever. But I saw this, and I thought it was so fascinating. And incredible, remarkable, to say the least. I shared it on Twitter. Of course, you can follow me on Twitter at Sovryn Tech. You probably saw that. I mean, it's a lot of stories that I eventually cover on the show. I actually share them there first. So if you want like a preview of what is the Golden Stallion going to say about this, hanging out at my Twitter, that's a great place to do so. But this story is from Ars Technica, which I'm kind of surprised it's on Ars, but okay. I guess it has as much right being there as it does on Sovryn Tech. But as I've often said, and if you're a new listener, you might not know this about me, and I know we've got a lot of new listeners coming on board. I am personally Brian Sovryn, Dr. Brian Sovryn. What makes me tick? What makes me go? Well, we're not going to get into that, but how do I identify? I am first and foremost a gamer. Second, I am a historian, a bit armchair, I suppose, but a historian. That's why I would consider myself. And third, I'm a tech journalist. So you can see where Sovryn Tech sits on that pecking order. History is an absolute passion of mine. I think it is, a lot of people get a little weird around history saying, well, can you really prove that happened? Blah, blah, blah. And everybody runs into varying issues. And I understand all of that. But the juice is worth the squeeze when you look into history, and especially when you get into the weird stuff. And this story from Ars Technica, let me read you the headline here. There's like a headline above that, which I think is kind of weird. And it says, comics were the oldest storytelling medium. It raises an interesting point. Let me read the headline, then I want to talk about that for a second. Because also, another famous phrase that I've said over the 8 years of Sovryn Tech is that when you cut me, I bleed comic book ink. Okay, like that's how much I love comic books. I don't love comic book movies. Like, fuck the Marvel Cinematic Universe. That can go shit itself. Okay, but I do love comic books. But let me read the headline for you. A 43,900-year-old cave painting is the oldest story ever recorded. Archaeologists say it might also contain the oldest known religious images. Now, we might take we might take that concept to task, that these are religious images, but I want to just go back to the top line that Ars Technica put there. Comics were the oldest storytelling medium. I never thought about cave art as being comic books. But in some ways, depending upon whether or not what is being depicted is fiction or otherwise, and that is often up to heavy debate, that's kind of accurate. and it's kind of brilliant. And I think it's part of, and I want to speak to this quickly, I think it's part of what appeals to people. Like, it's hard to say what makes comic books so appealing because they are such a unique storytelling medium. Just like a lot of people don't understand, why is poetry, why does it always grab certain minds so deeply, more so than, say, other types of prose? And I now I would add comic books into the same along with poetry, where it is poetry was the first way that we wrote. We wrote lyrically to match the way that we talk to each other. And humans, by nature, remember things very well in song and in poem. Okay, and so that when we broke a divide as a species and we started actually writing shit down, not just drawing this, but writing shit down, we did so in, I think it's fair to say, and there's evidence to back it up, we did so really with poetry. Comic books being, basically cave art, the modern version of cave art, is not too far off the mark. And I wonder if that's why they touch something in us very, very, I think, very deeply. And very primal. There's a core where, looking at a comic book just seems so natural. Anyway, I don't want to get too lost on that, but I never thought about that. And I think that might speak to why comic books are, again, such a powerful storytelling medium, and they really are. A lot of really great authors, people who have also written for comic books, sure, but, authors who have written full-on novels and all this, some of the most celebrated in the world, have come out very much in defense of comic books, saying this is not just stuff for kids. This is a totally valid writing medium that needs respect and all that. And well, maybe it's because again, I love what Ars said here, that it's the oldest storytelling medium. I don't think that that's too far off the mark. So anyway, let's get into the story a bit. But I'm going to read a little bit of the story, okay? And then we're going to, not too much. This is actually a very lengthy story, but it more or less gets into various realms of speculation. Well, if they're going to speculate, the man of tomorrow is going to speculate. And I do have speculations around this very thing. But this is, again, just at face value, is incredible. This is the oldest cave art, the oldest story, whether it's based on reality, whether it's fiction or religious imagery or what. Wonder what that or what is, that we have recorded. And that's incredible. So let's read it. At this very moment, You're a participant in one of the things that makes us human, the telling and consumption of stories. It's impossible to say when our species began telling each other stories or when we first evolved the ability to use language to communicate not only simple, practical concepts, but to share vivid accounts of events real or imagined. But by 43,900 years ago, people on the Indonesian island of Sulawesi, I might be pronouncing that wrong, but anyway, continuing, had started painting some of their stories in images on cave walls. A newly discovered painting in a remote cave depicts a hunting scene, and it's the oldest story that has been recorded. And if archaeologists are correct, it could also be the first record of spiritual belief and our first insight into what the makers of cave art were thinking. Now, there's some description, like this isn't a huge, it's a few meters across that you have some of this drawing on this cave, on this island in Indonesia. That kind of points at, that's going to point at where I come in. But let's talk a little bit about what's seen. And there's actually pictures. Link is in the show notes. You can look at the pictures of what they describe. And I'm going to scroll down to that. Things are a little weird because it's showing what appears to be a hunting party. Okay? A creature getting hunted down. But it's not by humans. And that's why they're talking about that maybe, just maybe, this is showing off some kind of, maybe some kind of fiction. Maybe it's a depiction of some religious story. Okay? Anyway, let me get to the paragraph on this so we can break this down. And this comes from the subheader of A Scene from Legend, with a question mark at the end. But the oldest story ever recorded by human hands may be something more than a hunting record. Quote, some or all aspects of this imagery may not pertain to human experiences in the real world, end quote, wrote Aubert and his colleagues. Up close, the tiny hunters don't look quite human. Many of them have strangely elongated faces, more like animal muzzles or snouts. One has a tail, and another appears to have a beak. The figures could represent human hunters clad in skins or masks. Aubert and his colleagues, however, say they look more like therianthropes, human-animal hybrids that show up in cultures around the world, including 15,500-year-old paintings in the La Chaux caves of France and a 40,000-year-old carved figure from Germany. Whether they're human, animal, or a bit of both, the hunters are facing prey animals of monstrous or mythological proportions. In real life, an anoa stands about 40 inches tall, and an Indonesian wild pig stands only 24 inches tall. On the wall of Liang Belu Sepang 4, which that's the cave where they found this, though, the creatures loom many times larger than the hunters arrayed against them. It looks like a scene out of a legend, not a dry record of another day's hunting. And its presence suggests that Liang Belu Sepang 4, I'm sure I'm saying that wrong too, may have been a sacred or at least important place to the people who once lived in the area. Archaeologists found no trace of the usual debris of human life, stone tools, discarded bones, and cooking fires anywhere in the cave or in the much larger chamber beneath it. That's no wonder. Liang Belu Sepang 4 is set in a cliff 20 meters above the valley floor, and one doesn't simply walk in. Quote, accessing it requires climbing, and this is not an occupation site, end quote, Aubert told Ars. Quote, so people were going in there for another reason, end quote. And then it gets on to talking about basically the invention of fiction and getting around this notion of, okay, is this somehow, a religious fiction, a depiction of spiritual beliefs, some legend, some story? Is it, basically making everything seem bigger than it actually is? Because, that makes the story fiercer about this heroic legend, or, this should I say hero of legend? Okay, is it something along those lines? That's where they start running. I'm pleased that, like me, they don't instantly start saying aliens, right? You can just see Giorgio Tsoukalos coming out of nowhere, and his hair kind of rises above the picture first in the cave, and then suddenly you get the full rear headshot of Giorgio. And next thing you know, there's a History Channel, or the non-History Channel really these days, but you'll have a History Channel camera crew there ready to take the pictures, and you hear the voice, that ethereal voice of the guy that narrates Ancient Aliens. Could it be and extraterrestrials or whatever? Maybe you have David Hatcher Childress saying that or something ridiculous. I'm glad they don't go there, because I don't think you need to go there. Now, there's no doubt that these are, effectively, cave drawings are what we call petroglyphs. There's no doubt that they smack of, and these are much older than what I'm about to describe. We're talking about 44,000 years ago. It is reminiscent of things that I know have been covered in Ancient Aliens. For example, the rock art in Sago Canyon in Utah. Okay, now this is where you see those very funny figures. They almost look like ghosts. In fact, I think technically archaeologists label that part of Sago Canyon the Holy Ghost relief, because they kind of look like ghosts. They have antennae, and they definitely don't look human. They have these huge eyes and everything. You can look into the Sago Canyon artwork. Now, that artwork at its oldest would be around 4,000 years ago, done by what must be, or we would assume must be, Native Americans, of some kind. Now, understand there have been different Native American tribes that have inhabited the area of the Sago Canyon over the past few thousand years. It's not like it's just one, even though, more modern tribes do lay claim to it to a degree, and lay claim to the ability to read it, and they say, that they're the sky people and whatever else. And while there might be some truth to some of that, again, going to aliens is a quantum leap that's not required at all, and certainly doesn't, take Occam's razor to that shit. But anyway, but the stuff at Sago Canyon is, very old, even the oldest parts of it that are about 4,000 years old. Now, the more interesting parts of Sago Canyon, again, we're not talking about the Indonesian island here, which is 44,000 years ago. The more interesting parts are probably, they might be about 1,000 years old, where it gets really interesting, and you'll know what I'm talking about when you look at it. If you look up the Sago Canyon, petroglyphs, you'll know which ones I mean, because they do look very, very strange. But again, it is a relief that has been added to over time. Okay, it smacks of that. All petroglyphs kind of smack of each other, but it's interesting in that you do have multiple ancient cultures or ancient humans that are drawing things that are clearly not human. And what's the idea around that? Now, is it these, I don't want to say Therians, right? Because Therians that's like a modern movement where there are people. It's like furries, but furries on steroids. And I don't mean that like they're the size of Arnold Schwarzenegger or something. I mean in that their concept, like these Therians today, actually think that they're a wolf, or they think that they're some other kind of animal and they're not actually human. But what is it? Therianthropes? That's an actual concept. That's a very real thing. Okay, where the idea of human-animal hybrids, you think like the Minotaur, or the idea of is that maybe these are just humans who are wearing animal skins, but that doesn't explain the size of the creature that they're hunting, which is huge. So how do we put all of this together? Well, I think there's a couple ways that you can actually put this together, and part of it has to do with its geographic location. It being in Indonesia, okay, the island of Sulawesi. I think that's how it's pronounced, but I could be wrong about that. In 44,000 years ago, I'm going to present something to you here, okay? I'm going to present to you a couple of concepts to consider. Now, the first part, and the article actually brings this up, is that let's be clear here that, not everything, because before this, the oldest stuff we had, again, was, say in Germany or other parts of Europe. That is no longer true. Now the oldest thing we've got is in Indonesia. Okay. So, caves in France or caves in Germany. Again, Germany was where the second, I think, oldest was, being around 40,000 years old. It's pretty clear that you have ancient. Now, not to say that what you saw in Germany is related, or frankly, it's interesting in that it's so old, but not as interesting, perhaps, what it's visually depicting as what you see in Sulawesi. Okay. What's interesting is that concurrently, these kinds of petroglyphs, this kind of rock art, these comic books for ancient humans, were being drawn all over the world, in very diverse parts of the world. And 40,000 years and 44,000 years, that's a pretty big stretch of time in between each other. But this does raise problems with a lot of people who think that a lot of this stuff all started in Europe. Oh, absolutely not. So that's part one. Part two in this, and I guess there will be a part three when we get to it, but part two of this is that where exactly, again, this is not an easy thing to get to. What was the purpose behind this? Now, if it had some religious significance, that's anybody's guess in a very real way, but that also is a guess, okay? Because again, it's not just something you walk into. It was a climb that you engaged in, and you went up there to tell the story. There's a lot of meaning behind this. And that there's a point to get into around that. In fact, let's rock it. And that'll play into where I think who did this is from. And it's, again, folks, it's not aliens. One thing you have to understand about ancient humans, and certainly ancient humans at this time frame, you cannot, if you're a human being, the idea of, and yeah, this might be a little bit of a theory of mine, but it's not. I'm not the only one to have it, and I don't think that. I think it's beyond the theoretical. But let's go. Today, in our modern world, okay, there are, shall we say, safety measures in place. Okay, you are allowed to break with reality and live. People will take care of you, or, you're still able to go into McDonald's. Access to food is easy. There are not giant creatures out waiting to kill you, or eat you. Civilization in and of itself creates a barrier between you and nature. And that is something you have to accept in a lot of ways that are worth discussing, but that we're not going to discuss here. But regardless, today you have the ability to be out of touch with reality as a human being and survive. This simple point, this simple fact, was not true 40,000 years ago. You could not afford to be anything less than razor sharp in your interaction, understanding, and encounter with nature and with reality. If you were anything less, you were dead. if you for a second thought that that tiger, okay, could somehow just magically disappear because God would save you, you would be food for said tiger. Nothing was coming to save you but your own wits, your own senses, and your own sensibility as an intelligent human being. And that is a beautiful thing, not a scary one. I do think we've lost sight of that, but that's, as a species, but that's besides the point. My point is that to survive, to make it anywhere, to be able to make this climb into this cave, you had to be so in touch with reality, with cause and effect, you could afford nothing less. Now that raises a couple of points. One is that I don't think this is a spiritual relief at all. I don't think this is spiritual artwork. I don't really even think that this is necessarily a work of fiction. Maybe it's a work of fiction, but the idea that it's a depiction of some kind of religious legend, no, I don't buy that for a second, because I don't think humans at the time had that. When did humans start to get religion? That is a very interesting question, and that has to do perhaps with ingesting something that did cause you to have a break from reality, and you end up creating an entire cult around mushrooms or something. But that's another story for another time, and one that I've theorized on this show in the past. Humanity at the time, and what you see in a lot of things that are remotely close to the story, or to the time frame here, 44,000 years ago, it is not depictions of fancy. Okay, now when you get into Sago Canyon, it's a little easier for you to make the argument that those could be religious depictions or depictions of legends. Why? Because humans, yes, at that time, by that point, had developed religions en masse. Okay, just even 6,000 years ago. That's not unfair, okay, to make that claim. But 44,000 years ago? Oh, no. I mean, you're going past the wall of history for one, but then there's all kinds of other things involved with that. So, I mean, while I could be open to them potentially depicting some kind of fiction with, these creatures that look very strange, these hunters with tails and with heads of animals and all this, I am going to lay out a different theory for you. And I say all this about, being in touch with reality being necessary to survive as a human being at the time. That they depicted exactly what they saw. Whoa, wait, are you going to say it's aliens? No, motherfucker, I just told you it's not aliens. Okay? There's a book. I've mentioned this book many times. I've actually made it available online because, well, one, the author is dead, unfortunately. And I say unfortunately because I think he did tremendous work. It used to be a very expensive book. If you were to buy it new when it came out about 20 some odd years ago, the book would cost you around $130 new. It's not because it was rare. It's because it was done on a very famous nautical imprint that, well, they figured you were going to be on a yacht or a very fancy sailboat if you were reading this thing. So it cost a pretty good chunk of change. What did I do? Well, I made it available to everybody for free. You're welcome. The book is called Out of Antarctica by a guy named Robert Argod. Again, unfortunately, he passed away a few years ago. Out of Antarctica is a lot of his own detective work, a lot of his own sailing, Robert Argod's own theory, and it's very well done work. That he studies heavily Polynesian cultures, which understand Polynesian mythology and a lot of broader aspects of kind of the Polynesian narrative and Polynesian culture would span to Indonesia. Okay, so for it to be at the island of Sulawesi, if that is somehow something that's Polynesian, that's not too crazy. But you say, yeah, but Polynesian culture, wouldn't show up until many, many thousands of years later. That's not unfair to say. However, again, in Polynesian mythology, with no need to reference gods, even though not to say that they're not there in their own works, they talk about coming from a land of, basically a land of snow. The Polynesians, in Polynesian mythology, it says that humanity came from this land that ended up turning white and just got covered. And as you can guess by the title of Robert Argod's book, his suggestion is that humanity may have actually started literally in Antarctica before it was frozen over. And Polynesian mythology actually records that. I think that this 44,000-year-old petroglyph, cave art, in Indonesia, I think that supports his theory pretty hard. I really do. Now, and this would explain certain things. Now, what the hell? What are these? People with beaks and tails and all of this that we're getting depicted on this cave art? Well, I don't know, because frankly, once you get into the idea that maybe they were depicting something that was not even there, but something that happened in Antarctica, and they just happened to draw it there and depict it there, well, we don't know a whole lot about what was on Antarctica. I mean, we're constantly finding all kinds of strange things, whenever Antarctica wants to reveal its secrets, including biological things. Maybe they were drawing a creature that was native to Antarctica at one point. Now, I get it. I mean, Antarctica, I know some people could say, well, if you want to say that it's from Antarctica and because we don't know shit about Antarctica, it might as well be saying aliens. I don't think that's equivocal. You can't write off Antarctica like you want to write off aliens. I'm sorry. But maybe they saw something there, or maybe they brought something from there. Or were they what kind of creatures were they exactly depicting engaging in this hunting party? Are they somehow some kind of different type of human that Polynesian culture, or what would later on become Polynesian culture, but these sailors, these ancient sailors out of Antarctica, which is exactly what the Polynesian narrative would lay out. Maybe they saw things that we just haven't discovered yet. We're discovering new types of humans all the time. We're discovering new species of all kinds of creatures all the time. So to instantly jump to the idea, oh, well, this is a fictional depiction or a religious depiction, I don't think that's being intellectually honest. I don't think that's being scientifically rigorous. I think the first thing you should try to disprove is that it's something in reality. And I think one would do well, again, we have, just like the Polynesians have their narrative, we have our narratives. Say even though I hate this term, but it's also part of the narrative, in Western civilization, right? Yeah, we came out of Africa, or even have assets of like, no, actually we came out of Europe, and blah, blah, blah. No, we buy into these things and we stick with them. And because it fits the evidence best at the time. But when we get presented with some new evidence, and I think we would do well to consider that very simple notion that humans had to be in touch with reality, and they probably drew reality more than they got into some fanciful flights of fiction, then that raises some very interesting questions, but questions that have already been posited, that already have explorations and investigations into them, like the book Out of Antarctica, which, understand, folks, the book Out of Antarctica, I mean, it's not something done by Eric von Daniken. It's a very serious text. Okay, investigated rigorously. It's the real deal. This is not some, Bear and Company didn't put it out, or I don't know, pick your book that'll actually publish David Hatcher Childress. And I don't say that to disparage those guys. I think some of their books are actually very interesting, including David Hatcher Childress's work. But you get my point. And the idea that now, I mean, you have granted it's thousands of years, but you have this broad span of when all this artwork starts showing up, the idea that humanity spread out from one central landmass, like say Antarctica, and they all started drawing, eventually they'd get up to Germany, start drawing there, or they get to, very close proximity to Antarctica, and we get our first drawings in that same area. Yeah, I think it points at that. As far as what's being depicted, again, I don't think it's aliens, but then I'm open to it being some form of actual life that existed. I don't see any reason that it can't be that, based upon the fact that, again, we don't know. But my central, premise with all this is the idea that humanity, when it started spreading across the earth, that it started right there at that, when you look at the map, the bottom continent, right? On that ice world. And I don't think that's too crazy, because at the time, it probably wasn't a nice world. I mean, we can get into the Piri-Reis map, we can get into all these things where we know that humans at some point had knowledge of what Antarctica looked like without ice. Did that get transmitted, by the, whoever left that continent so many tens of thousands of years ago, or at the very least thousands of years ago? We're not even getting into ice ages on any of that. But I see this, and again, I get worried when people start instantly running to, oh, this is religion. I mean, again, the idea of it being a depiction of some kind of fictional legend, something, maybe. But I think there's the real chance that it's actually depicting something very real and really an unknown chapter in humanity's history. Nothing to do with aliens, none of that horseshit. It doesn't have to be that complex. Okay, it doesn't even have to be as complex as fiction. It can be as simple as that there are wild types of life that existed on a continent that wasn't always such a mystery, that being Antarctica, and maybe humanity started there as well and actually brought its knowledge as it sailed those seas so long ago. It's fascinating stuff. It's gorgeous art to look at. I mean, you can barely, make it out. It helps that they have little arrows pointing at what everything is. And, you really have to study it for a while to really get it. If you're going to ask me, what do I think was being depicted in Sago Canyon? Frankly, I wouldn't mind applying the same logic that I did to what was shown at Siluasi to that maybe they saw something that actually looked like that. Again, it doesn't have to be aliens. Who knows what types of life have walked around? I mean, remember, I think we think about like the woolly mammoth, right? We think about the woolly mammoth as like something, it's like the dinosaurs. We think about them as something that existed, millions of years ago or something like that. Well, no. The woolly mammoth only died off about 6,000 years ago. These paintings are older than the woolly mammoth by a long shot. Okay, there are incredible creatures. The elephant bird. There's so many incredible creatures that even just existed up to 100 years ago. Maybe there's still a couple around, but that finally just, for whatever reason, be it human intervention or, otherwise environmental issues, whatever the fuck it was, that they've disappeared now. And so to instantly write this stuff off just because we might not have a fossil record or we don't have any record of them elsewhere, to instantly write them off as somehow being religious or fictional or something like that, I think is a mistake. And I think we do well to consider other possibilities of, the human story, the human narrative. I mean, this is all about telling stories, right? Well, I think the human story, it's missing a few chapters. And this might have finally started to fill one of those missing chapters in. Anyway, you want to talk about this kind of stuff? Actually a place you could call in to do that. Let me before we close out the show, I want you to go to Sovryn Tech sponsor, freetalklive.com. It is an open phones call-in show. It's the number 27 talk show in the United States. But believe me, they will let you talk about this stuff. I know, because I used to as a host when I was on back in the day. What a pleasure that was. But I want you to check it out. freetalklive.com runs 7 nights a week, 3 hours a night. You are going to get the chance to get your voice heard by millions of people. How could you go wrong? Go for it. Give it a shot. Listen to it. It's all there for you. freetalklive.com. Over a decade's worth of archives available there. I mean, it is just amazing how much audio you could consume. And I guarantee you it is as entertaining as it can be informative. So give it a shot, freetalklive.com. I thank them so much for sponsoring Sovryn Tech. In fact, they re-upped for 2020. I am so honored by that. Glad that my listeners are are enjoying it because they heard you. So anyway, that's it for this episode of Sovryn Tech. Got a little bit of the weird. And I think we came up with somewhat of a more rational explanation than saying, this is because humanity was out of touch and they were religious. Yeah, no, that doesn't need to be. We got to stop insulting our ancestors so much. We're pretty brutal to them. No, they were smart, just like us. Anyway, that will be it for this episode of Sovryn Tech. Of course, go to Zomia1.com and you can join the Zomia 1 Underground, where you can get access to exclusive content that comes out every single week, including the Q&A show that comes out every week. And then there's thousands of hours of back content there that you get access to, that you can listen to at your leisure. Zomia1.com for that. That is it for Sovryn Tech, and I will see all of you on the other side.
Thank you for listening to Sovryn Tech. and Osiris-1 production. Now go out there and make some trouble.